The biggest mistake you can make is deciding who someone is before they ever say a word. The breakfast rush had already settled into its familiar rhythm inside Maple Grove Diner, a place where the coffee was always hot, the bacon always crisp, and the regulars always claimed the same booths every Saturday morning. Outside, the late spring sun stretched across the quiet streets of a small Georgia town, casting long golden reflections across parked pickup trucks and family sedans. Nothing about the morning suggested it would become the story everyone in town would still be talking about months later. Near the front window, two black men sat across from each other in a worn leather booth, quietly finishing their breakfast. Marcus Reed, 42, carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who rarely wasted words. His charcoal jacket rested neatly beside him, while a plain blue button-down made him look like any other customer enjoying a slow weekend meal. Across from him sat Ethan Brooks, younger by several years, whose relaxed smile never quite reached his observant eyes. Every few seconds, he casually glanced toward the entrance before returning to his coffee, as though he were simply waiting for an old friend to arrive. Their conversation stayed low, interrupted only by the clink of silverware and the soft hum of country music drifting from an aging jukebox near the counter. Around them, life unfolded exactly as it always had. A retired couple shared a slice of peach pie before heading home. A waitress balanced 3 steaming plates with practiced ease while greeting customers by name. A young father laughed as his little daughter carefully counted syrup packets on the table. The smell of fresh biscuits, maple syrup, and brewed coffee filled the air with a comforting warmth that made strangers feel welcome within minutes of walking through the front door. At least, that was usually true. Marcus slowly checked the old wall clock above the pie display. 9:23, exactly on schedule. Without drawing attention, he adjusted the ceramic mug sitting beside his plate by less than an inch before folding his hands together again. Ethan noticed the tiny movement but offered no reaction beyond taking another sip of coffee. To everyone else, it looked meaningless, ordinary, forgettable. Yet neither man appeared impatient, nervous, or distracted. They seemed completely at ease, almost as though waiting itself was part of the plan. The elderly waitress named Linda stopped beside their booth with a warm smile. "Can I top those off, gentlemen?" she asked, lifting the coffee pot. Marcus smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Linda filled both mugs before moving toward another table, unaware that she had just walked through the center of a morning far more important than she could possibly imagine. Outside, a police cruiser rolled slowly past the diner before disappearing beyond the intersection. Ethan watched it through the reflection in the glass, instead of turning his head directly. "Busy morning," he quietly remarked. Marcus nodded once. Sometimes the busiest mornings look like the quietest ones. Neither man smiled after that. The clock continued ticking. Somewhere in the kitchen, a bell rang as another order was ready. The front door opened, letting in a brief gust of warm air along with the sound of heavy footsteps. Conversations softened almost instantly. The atmosphere shifted in a way no one could quite explain. Before anyone realized it, an ordinary breakfast had begun turning into something no one inside Maple Grove Diner would ever forget. The 2 uniformed officers stepped through the entrance with the unhurried confidence of men who believed every room naturally belonged to them. Their polished badges caught the morning light as the door closed behind them, and for a brief moment the gentle sound of forks against ceramic plates faded beneath the weight of silent attention. Officer Daniel Harper scanned the diner from left to right with practiced certainty, while Officer Ryan Collins followed half a step behind, his expression unreadable but alert. Neither man appeared rushed. They were simply looking, or at least that was how it seemed. Linda greeted them with the same welcoming smile she offered every customer. "Good morning, officers. Booth or counter today?" Daniel acknowledged her with a quick nod before letting his eyes continue drifting across the room. His gaze paused the instant it landed on Marcus and Ethan. Something in his expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Ryan noticed the change and followed his partner's line of sight toward the booth by the window. Marcus quietly stirred the fresh coffee Linda had poured only moments earlier. Ethan continued reading the local newspaper lying beside his plate, occasionally folding one corner before turning another page. Neither man looked toward the officers, yet both were fully aware they had entered. Years of experience had taught them to recognize changes in a room long before anyone spoke. The temperature had not changed, but the atmosphere certainly had. Daniel exchanged a glance with Ryan before walking toward the counter instead of taking an empty table. He lowered his voice just enough that only Linda could hear the first few words. "Who are those two?" Linda looked over her shoulder without hesitation. "They have been here since a little after 9. Nice gentlemen. Ordered breakfast, tipped well, and have not caused a single problem." Daniel did not respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Marcus and Ethan as though searching for an answer no one else could see. Around the diner, conversations slowly resumed, but they carried a different rhythm now. People still laughed. Coffee still poured. Plates still arrived from the kitchen. Yet curiosity drifted quietly through the room like invisible smoke. A man reading the sports section lowered his newspaper just enough to watch. The young father glanced toward the officers before returning his attention to his daughter, although his eyes wandered back seconds later. Even the cook briefly leaned through the kitchen window to see what had captured everyone's attention. Marcus finally looked up, not directly at the officers, but toward the wall clock above the counter. 9:26. 3 minutes had passed since the cruiser rolled by outside. Ethan noticed the same time without moving his head. "Still early," he said softly. Marcus answered with the slightest nod. "Exactly." Daniel stepped away from the counter, straightened the front of his uniform, and began walking toward their booth with slow, deliberate steps. Ryan followed close behind. Linda opened her mouth as though considering whether she should say something, but uncertainty held her back. She had lived in Maple Grove her entire life. She understood how quickly ordinary mornings could become uncomfortable when assumptions replaced conversations. Marcus rested both hands calmly on the edge of the table, while Ethan folded the newspaper with careful precision and placed it beside his untouched toast. Neither man showed frustration. Neither looked nervous. Instead, they exchanged one quiet glance that lasted less than a second before returning their attention to the approaching officers. Whatever happened next, it was clear they had already prepared themselves long before they ever walked through the diner's front door. Officer Daniel Harper stopped beside the booth and rested one hand lightly against the polished wooden divider. His shadow stretched across the table, yet Marcus Reed did not immediately look up. Instead, he calmly reached for his coffee, took a slow sip, and placed the mug back onto its saucer with quiet precision. Ethan Brooks folded his hands together, his expression relaxed enough that anyone watching might have mistaken him for a traveler enjoying a peaceful morning before driving home. Daniel cleared his throat. "Morning, gentlemen." Marcus met his eyes with a courteous smile. "Good morning, officer." The response was respectful, calm, and completely ordinary, but something about it seemed to unsettle Daniel instead of reassuring him. Ryan Collins stood slightly behind his partner, silently observing every movement, every glance, every pause that unfolded around the booth. "Mind telling us what brings you to Maple Grove?" Daniel asked. Marcus answered without hesitation. "Breakfast," Ethan added with a faint smile. The biscuits came highly recommended. A few nearby customers quietly chuckled before quickly looking back down at their meals. Daniel did not smile. "You two from around here?" Marcus gently shook his head. "Passing through." "Passing through for business?" Daniel continued. Marcus looked toward the window for a brief second before returning his attention to the officer. "Something like that." The answer was honest enough to avoid being false, yet vague enough to reveal almost nothing. Ryan studied both men carefully. Their clothes were simple but well-fitted. Their shoes carried fresh dust from country roads rather than city sidewalks. Marcus wore an inexpensive wristwatch, but it was exactly 5 seconds ahead of the wall clock. Ethan had ordered another coffee, yet had barely touched the second cup. Small details. Ordinary details. Still, Ryan could not explain why they stayed fixed in his mind. Linda approached cautiously, carrying a fresh basket of biscuits. "Everything all right over here?" she asked with an uncertain smile. Marcus thanked her warmly, while Ethan accepted another biscuit without appearing bothered by the unexpected interruption. Daniel looked at the untouched basket before speaking again. "You planning on staying much longer?" Ethan glanced toward Marcus before answering politely. "We are waiting for someone." That simple sentence settled over the diner like a quiet fog. Waiting for someone. Nothing illegal. Nothing unusual. Yet everyone within earshot seemed to hear it differently. The retired couple stopped talking. The young father gently lowered his coffee mug. Even the jukebox reached the end of a song, leaving a brief silence that somehow felt louder than music. Daniel crossed his arms. "Who are you waiting for?" Marcus smiled politely, but offered no name. "Someone who asked us to meet here." Ryan noticed something then. Marcus never appeared defensive. Ethan never looked anxious. They were not searching for exits. They were not whispering excuses. If anything, both men behaved like people who expected every minute to unfold exactly as planned. Outside, another vehicle rolled slowly past the front windows, but it was not a marked police cruiser. It continued down the street before disappearing around the corner without attracting attention from anyone except Marcus, whose eyes briefly followed its reflection in the glass. Ethan quietly reached for the check, looked at the total, and placed several folded bills beneath the edge of the receipt before gently sliding it back toward the center of the table. "Looks like we have a few more minutes," he said softly. Marcus nodded once. "That should be enough." Daniel frowned. He could not explain why those words lingered in his thoughts. They sounded ordinary, but they carried the quiet confidence of people who knew something the rest of the room did not. Around them, Maple Grove Diner continued serving breakfast, pouring coffee, and welcoming new customers. Yet beneath the familiar sounds of ordinary life, an invisible clock continued counting toward a moment no one inside had the ability to predict. Daniel Harper slowly exhaled before speaking again, his tone becoming firmer without ever rising above the quiet conversations surrounding them. "I think it is time for you gentlemen to finish up and head somewhere else." The words were calm, but they carried the unmistakable weight of authority. Marcus looked at him for a moment, then glanced around the diner. Families were eating breakfast. The elderly couple had returned to their pie. Linda stood behind the counter pretending to organize coffee cups, while quietly watching every second unfold. Marcus spoke in the same measured voice he had used since the officers arrived. "Have we broken any rules?" Daniel answered almost immediately. "I am asking you to cooperate." Ethan rested both hands on the table and offered a polite smile. "Officer, we paid for our breakfast. We have not disturbed anyone, and we are simply waiting for someone." Ryan Collins remained silent, but his attention sharpened when he noticed something unusual. Marcus never argued. Ethan never protested. Neither man appeared offended. They simply answered each question with calm confidence, almost as though they understood exactly how important every word inside the diner might become later. Daniel looked toward the front windows before returning his attention to the booth. "People have raised concerns." Marcus glanced around the room once more. Several customers quickly looked away the instant their eyes met his. Others continued eating as though they had heard nothing. Linda quietly shook her head, but Daniel never noticed. "May I ask who raised those concerns?" Marcus asked respectfully. Daniel paused for half a second before replying. "That is not something I need to discuss." Ethan leaned back slightly. "Then perhaps there has been a misunderstanding." The sentence carried no frustration, only quiet patience. A fresh pot of coffee began brewing behind the counter, filling the room with the familiar aroma that usually made mornings feel peaceful. Today it only emphasized the growing silence. Every ordinary sound seemed strangely amplified. The ticking wall clock, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the scrape of a chair moving across the tile floor. Ryan observed Marcus with increasing curiosity. Most people became uncomfortable during unexpected encounters with law enforcement. Some grew defensive. Others became nervous. Marcus did neither. Instead, he occasionally glanced toward the entrance as though he expected someone to arrive at any moment. Ethan mirrored the same quiet certainty. Daniel shifted his stance. "I am giving you an opportunity to leave without creating unnecessary attention." Marcus folded his napkin neatly beside his empty plate before answering. "Officer, attention is not something we came here looking for." Ethan nodded once. "We only intend to keep our appointment." Daniel frowned. "Appointment with who?" Marcus smiled politely. "You will know soon enough." Ryan caught those words immediately. There was no arrogance behind them. No challenge. Only confidence. It was the confidence of someone following a schedule instead of improvising one. Outside, a dark gray sedan slowly entered the parking lot before continuing past the diner without stopping. Marcus noticed its reflection in the window and quietly checked the wall clock again. 9:29. Exactly 6 minutes since Linda had refilled their coffee. Ethan followed Marcus's glance, then gently straightened the folded receipt still resting beneath the payment he had already left on the table. Daniel interpreted the movement differently. "Are you getting ready to leave?" Ethan answered with complete honesty. "Very soon." Neither officer realized that the meaning behind those two simple words was entirely different from what they imagined. Somewhere beyond the front door, events had already begun moving into place with quiet precision, and inside Maple Grove Diner, every passing second brought the room closer to a moment that would challenge first impressions, test assumptions, and remind everyone watching that appearances often concealed far more than they revealed. Daniel Harper remained beside the booth, his patience wearing thinner with every calm answer Marcus and Ethan offered. Around them, the breakfast crowd pretended to focus on pancakes, eggs, and steaming coffee, but nearly every pair of eyes drifted back toward the quiet exchange. Linda reached for another stack of clean mugs, although her attention never truly left the front corner of the diner. She had worked there for almost 30 years, and experience had taught her that the loudest moments often began with people speaking softly. Marcus glanced once more toward the entrance before lowering his eyes to the folded receipt. His fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table, perfectly still. Ethan casually adjusted the salt shaker a few inches to the left, then leaned back again as though nothing unusual was happening. Daniel noticed the movement and instinctively followed Ethan's gaze across the dining room. Nothing appeared out of place. Families continued eating. The cook called another order through the kitchen window. A delivery driver carried 2 boxes of fresh produce through the rear entrance before disappearing into the storage room. Everything seemed completely ordinary, yet Ryan Collins could not shake the feeling that invisible pieces were quietly falling into place. He watched Marcus with growing curiosity. The man had answered every question without hesitation, never speaking too much and never saying too little. It reminded Ryan of someone trained to think several steps ahead. Daniel folded his arms once more. "I have asked politely. I do not want this to become more complicated than it needs to be." Marcus looked directly at him. "Neither do we." Ethan nodded. "We appreciate professionalism." The sentence lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Daniel interpreted it as criticism, but Ryan heard something different. It sounded almost like encouragement. Near the register, an elderly customer quietly reached for his wallet while whispering to his wife, who gave a small shrug before glancing toward the booth again. Across the room, the young father gently placed another pancake onto his daughter's plate, trying to keep her attention away from the unfolding scene. Outside, a delivery van rolled past without stopping. Seconds later, another vehicle appeared at the far end of the parking lot before turning onto the next street, instead of pulling in. Marcus noticed only the reflection moving across the front window. 9:31. He silently counted another few seconds before looking toward Ethan. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. Ethan gave the slightest nod, almost impossible for anyone else to detect. Linda finally stepped closer, forcing a reassuring smile. "Gentlemen, would anyone like more coffee?" Marcus thanked her warmly. "No, ma'am. Everything has been excellent." Ethan smiled as well. "You have been very kind." Linda returned the smile, although concern remained in her eyes. Daniel shifted his weight, convinced the conversation had reached its conclusion. What he did not realize was that Marcus and Ethan were not delaying anything. They were waiting for a precise moment. Somewhere beyond Maple Grove Diner, another schedule was moving with quiet precision, measured not by emotions or assumptions, but by exact timing. Inside the diner, the old wall clock continued its steady rhythm, each passing second carrying the room closer to an answer that would soon force everyone present to reconsider what they believed they understood about authority, appearances, and the extraordinary truth hidden beneath an ordinary Saturday morning. The silence finally broke when Daniel Harper took one deliberate step closer to the table. His voice remained controlled, but the patience behind it had nearly disappeared. "Gentlemen, this is your last opportunity. I am instructing you to leave the diner." Marcus Reed looked up without the slightest trace of anger. "Officer, with respect, we are lawful customers. We ordered breakfast, paid our bill, and have disturbed no one." Ethan Brooks calmly added, "We only need a few more minutes." Daniel slowly shook his head. "Your business here is finished." Marcus answered with quiet certainty. "Not yet." Ryan Collins watched every expression with increasing uncertainty. He had expected frustration by now. He had expected raised voices or hurried explanations. Instead, Marcus and Ethan remained remarkably composed, as though the conversation itself mattered more than its outcome. Ryan noticed Marcus glance once again toward the front window. There was no fear in his eyes, only expectation. Linda stood behind the register with folded hands, silently hoping the situation would end peacefully. She knew every regular customer in Maple Grove, but these two strangers had shown nothing except courtesy since the moment they walked inside. Across the room, conversations had nearly disappeared. Coffee cups rested untouched. Forks stopped halfway to plates. Even the little girl who had been laughing over syrup packets now looked toward the booth, sensing the unusual seriousness surrounding the adults. Daniel leaned slightly forward. "I do not want to repeat myself." Marcus offered a respectful nod. "Neither do I." Ethan slowly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Daniel immediately focused on the movement. Ryan instinctively shifted his attention as well. Without making any sudden motion, Ethan removed a small leather notebook and placed it neatly beside his coffee cup. He did not open it. He simply rested his hand on top of it before looking back at Daniel. "We believe misunderstandings are best solved through conversation," Ethan said calmly. Daniel glanced at the notebook but showed little interest. To him, it looked like an ordinary memo pad. He returned his attention to Marcus instead. "Who exactly are you waiting for?" Marcus answered with complete honesty. "The people who asked us to be here." Daniel sighed, clearly dissatisfied. "You keep giving the same answer." Marcus nodded. "Because it has not changed." At that exact moment, a faint vibration echoed across the tabletop. Ethan's cellular phone lit up for less than 2 seconds before the screen went dark again. He did not reach for it. He did not even look down. Marcus noticed the brief glow and quietly smiled. Ryan caught the exchange immediately. It lasted less than a heartbeat, yet it carried the unmistakable confidence of two men who had just received silent confirmation that something important was happening outside. Through the front window, an unmarked dark sport utility vehicle slowly entered the parking lot. It stopped several spaces away from the entrance without attracting attention from most customers. Another vehicle appeared moments later, parking just beyond it. No emergency lights flashed. No sirens sounded. Everything remained strangely ordinary. Daniel never turned toward the windows. His focus stayed fixed on the booth. Ryan, however, noticed the reflections moving across the glass. A question formed in his mind before he could stop it. Why would multiple unmarked vehicles arrive at the same quiet diner within seconds of each other on an otherwise peaceful Saturday morning? Marcus looked once more at the old wall clock. 9:33. Then he folded his hands together and quietly said, almost as though speaking only to Ethan, "Right on time." Ethan answered with the smallest nod. Exactly as expected. Neither officer understood the meaning of those words, but within seconds, the front door handle slowly began to turn, and the next person to enter Maple Grove Diner was about to change the entire direction of the morning. The front door opened with the familiar chime that usually welcomed another hungry traveler, but this time every eye in Maple Grove Diner turned toward the entrance almost at once. 3 men and 1 woman stepped inside wearing plain business attire, blending easily into an ordinary Saturday morning except for the quiet confidence in the way they carried themselves. They paused just inside the doorway, scanning the room with calm precision before walking directly toward Marcus Reed and Ethan Brooks. Daniel Harper instinctively stepped sideways, placing himself between the newcomers and the booth. "Can I help you?" he asked. The woman offered a courteous smile. "Actually, officer, we are here to meet them." She nodded toward Marcus and Ethan without hesitation. Daniel frowned. "You know these gentlemen?" "Very well," she replied. Marcus finally rose from the booth for the first time that morning. He did not rush. He simply straightened his jacket, picked up the small leather notebook Ethan had placed on the table earlier, and turned toward the newcomers with the ease of someone greeting trusted colleagues. Ethan stood beside him, equally composed. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The quiet was broken only by the soft ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of fresh biscuits sliding from the oven in the kitchen. Marcus looked at Daniel with the same calm expression he had maintained all morning. "Officer Harper, thank you for your patience." Daniel looked confused. "What is going on?" Marcus slowly opened the leather notebook. Instead of handwritten notes, a polished gold badge rested inside beside official identification. He held it where Daniel and Ryan could clearly see it without making any dramatic gesture. My name is Marcus Reed. I am an undercover detective assigned to a joint state and federal investigation. Ethan calmly removed an identification wallet from inside his jacket as well. Ethan Brooks, undercover detective. Same task force. Neither man raised his voice. Neither displayed satisfaction. They simply stated the truth that had been waiting quietly beneath the surface since the beginning of the morning. Daniel stared at the credentials, his expression shifting from certainty to disbelief. Ryan leaned slightly closer, recognizing the official markings immediately. Every detail appeared authentic. Every question that had quietly troubled him throughout the encounter suddenly began fitting together. The careful answers, the remarkable patience, the constant awareness of time, the confidence that never faded. Linda placed one hand gently against the counter, visibly surprised but remaining silent. Around the diner, conversations disappeared completely. Customers who had spent the last several minutes watching with quiet curiosity now looked from Marcus to Ethan and back again, trying to understand how two men who had appeared to be ordinary travelers could suddenly carry such unexpected authority. The woman who had entered with the group stepped beside Marcus and presented her own credentials to Daniel. Special Agent Rebecca Lawson. We appreciate your cooperation this morning. Her voice remained respectful, offering no accusation and no hostility. Marcus closed the identification wallet and slipped it back into his jacket. We arrived early because this location had been selected for a scheduled meeting connected to an active investigation. Maintaining a low profile was essential. Ethan glanced briefly toward the front windows where the unmarked sport utility vehicles remained quietly parked outside. Our team has been in position for several minutes. Ryan slowly exhaled as the full picture settled into place. Nothing about Marcus or Ethan had been accidental. Every calm response, every measured pause, every glance toward the clock had reflected preparation rather than uncertainty. Daniel lowered his eyes for a brief moment before looking back at Marcus, realizing that the assumptions made only minutes earlier had quietly unraveled in front of an entire room without a single raised voice. For several seconds, no one inside Maple Grove Diner seemed willing to speak. The room that had been filled with quiet breakfast conversations now carried only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the old wall clock. Daniel Harper looked from Marcus Reed to Ethan Brooks, then towards Special Agent Rebecca Lawson, searching their faces for some sign that this was all an elaborate misunderstanding. He found none. Everything about them reflected calm professionalism. There was no celebration, no satisfaction, and certainly no attempt to embarrass anyone. Marcus gently closed his identification wallet and slipped it back inside his jacket before turning his attention to Rebecca. Has everyone arrived? Rebecca nodded once. The meeting can begin. The location has been secured, and the remaining members of the task force are already in place. Ethan glanced toward the windows where the unmarked sport utility vehicles remained quietly parked outside. Through the glass, several plainclothes investigators could now be seen speaking with one another while keeping a respectful distance from the entrance. Nothing appeared rushed. Nothing suggested panic. The entire operation unfolded with quiet precision. Ryan Collins slowly lowered his shoulders as realization settled over him. This diner was never the destination, he said almost to himself. Marcus offered a faint smile. No, it was simply the meeting point. Rebecca continued. The purpose of today's operation extends far beyond this building. Several agencies have been coordinating for months. This location was selected because it allowed our team to meet naturally without attracting unnecessary attention. Daniel remained silent. Every question he had asked that morning echoed in his memory. Every assumption he had made now carried a different meaning. Marcus looked toward him with the same respectful expression he had maintained since breakfast began. Officer Harper, our objective has always been to complete our assignment professionally. We appreciate that situations like this can develop quickly. There was no accusation in his voice, only measured honesty. That quiet restraint somehow made the moment even more powerful. Linda stepped out from behind the counter carrying a fresh pot of coffee. She looked uncertain for a moment before smiling warmly. Well, I suppose everyone could use a refill. A few customers quietly laughed, and the tension inside the diner eased for the first time that morning. Marcus accepted another cup with sincere gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am." Ethan smiled as well. "You have been kind to us from the moment we arrived." Linda nodded gently. "Everybody deserves to be treated with respect before being judged." Her words settled across the room with surprising weight. Several customers exchanged thoughtful glances, but said nothing. Outside, another unmarked vehicle entered the parking lot, and two additional investigators walked toward the entrance carrying slim document cases instead of emergency equipment. Ryan noticed them immediately. This truly had been a carefully organized meeting from the beginning. Daniel quietly removed his cap and held it at his side. The certainty he had carried into the diner had been replaced by reflection. He understood now that authority alone could never replace careful observation or patient conversation. Marcus glanced once more at the old wall clock. 9:38. Everything was unfolding exactly according to schedule. Rebecca looked toward the rear dining area where a private table had remained empty all morning. "We are ready whenever you are." Marcus nodded. "Then let us get to work." As the members of the task force calmly walked toward the reserved table, the ordinary sounds of breakfast slowly returned throughout Maple Grove Diner. But everyone who had witnessed the morning understood they had just watched a quiet reminder that the truth often arrives without raising its voice, and that genuine professionalism is revealed not by power alone, but by patience, humility, and the willingness to let facts speak before assumptions ever do. The meeting lasted less than an hour, but its purpose reached far beyond the walls of Maple Grove Diner. While the task force quietly reviewed documents and confirmed the next phase of the investigation, the restaurant gradually returned to its familiar rhythm. Coffee was poured, plates were cleared, families finished breakfast and headed home. Yet the people who had witnessed the morning carried away something much greater than another ordinary Saturday memory. Daniel Harper remained near the entrance for several moments before walking toward Marcus Reed. The confidence that had marked his first approach had given way to thoughtful humility. "Detective Reed," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions before I understood the situation." Marcus looked at him with the same steady expression he had shown from the beginning. "Officer, every day gives us another opportunity to make better decisions than the day before." There was no bitterness in his voice, no desire to embarrass anyone. Only a simple acknowledgement that respect could still exist after an uncomfortable moment. Ethan Brooks gathered several folders from the meeting table before smiling politely at Ryan Collins. "You asked more questions with your eyes than with your words." Ryan gave a small laugh. "Something never felt quite right. I just could not explain it." Ethan nodded. "Sometimes paying attention is the most important part of the job." Linda arrived carrying a small paper bag. "You gentlemen were in such a hurry with your meeting that you never touched the extra biscuits." Marcus accepted the bag with genuine appreciation. "Thank you, Linda. We will remember your kindness." She smiled warmly. "Around here, everybody gets breakfast first. The rest can wait." The simple sentence earned quiet smiles from nearly everyone nearby. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher over Maple Grove. The unmarked vehicles departed one by one without attracting attention from passing traffic. To anyone driving through town, it looked like another peaceful weekend. Only those inside the diner knew how much perspective could change in less than an hour. Before leaving, Marcus paused beside the front window and looked back across the dining room. The retired couple had returned to their conversation. The young father was helping his daughter finish the last bite of her pancakes. The jukebox had begun playing another old country song, filling the room with familiar comfort once again. Ordinary life had quietly reclaimed the space. Rebecca Lawson joined Marcus near the door. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded. There is still plenty of work ahead. Together, the members of the task force stepped outside and disappeared into the bright Georgia morning, carrying with them another chapter in an investigation that would continue far beyond the town limits. Daniel watched them leave before placing his cap back on his head. This time, he noticed something he had overlooked when the day began. True authority was never measured by how quickly someone exercised power. It was measured by the wisdom to pause, observe, and seek the truth before reaching a conclusion. Months later, people in Maple Grove would remember the morning not because voices had been raised or because anyone had tried to prove a point. They remembered it because dignity had remained stronger than pride. Patience had spoken louder than assumptions, and the truth had revealed itself without demanding attention. In the end, the lesson was remarkably simple. A badge can open a door, but character determines what happens after you walk through it. Respect cannot be earned by appearances, and justice is strongest when it begins with the courage to see every person as a human being before seeing anything else.